So while we are all rightfully focused on what is happening in the Middle East with Iran, we've taken our eyes off the ball in two foreign policy stories. When I say we, the collective, I guess, political media have a little bit. One is, of course, the war in Ukraine, and then the other is the pivot to Asia. I sort of joke about that. I'm old enough to remember in Obama's second term, the pivot to Asia. And even the first Trump administration realizing, the whole point of being energy independent was to then confront China and the pivot to Asia. We have, I think, still waiting for that pivot. But my next guest has a book on a topic, as you know, I've been covering it probably a bit more than your average political podcaster has covered, which is the issue of Taiwan and the fact that 2027, which was a marker that the Chinese had sort of set as sort of the is sort of when Xi wanted the Chinese military to be prepared to take Taiwan by force if necessary, is suddenly getting a lot closer, right? The object in this mirror is quite close now, being 2027. So the question is, where's this going? Where's this headed? And given what we're still experiencing with the war in Ukraine, what, frankly, the United States has gotten itself into when it comes to Iran, what does this mean for Taiwan? Well, my guest is Eyck Freymann. He is the author. He's of a new book called Defending Taiwan, A Strategy to Prevent War with China. And he joins me now. Eyck, it is nice to meet you.
Great to meet you, Chuck. It's a pleasure to be on the show.
So let's start with the premise of your book. When you say defending Taiwan and a strategy, is this a diplomatic strategy that you want to outline, a military strategy, a strategy of deterrence, a strategy to eventually recognize independence for Taiwan? What is it?
This is a strategy to prevent a devastating war with China, something that I think should be a goal uniting Democrats, Republicans, everyone in between, and a strategy to preserve an honorable peace in the Taiwan Strait, but also in the region as a whole. Something we can get into on this show is that Taiwan's fate is just connected to the fate of the broader region. The United States does not support Taiwan independence. We have a long-standing one China policy. It's decades old. It's served us well. It's helped to deter war in the past.
I appreciate you saying that. We've had a couple of presidents who seem to utter some sentences that put that policy in question. I mean, Joe Biden said some things out loud that no American president had said when it came to promising support for Taiwan.
That's true. And the one China policy is funny. It's a bit like a magic incantation because we talk a lot about it, but the substance of it is sort of always shifting and evolving. But that's okay because there really is no such thing as a status quo in the Taiwan Strait. There never has been. There's a military balance. There's a diplomatic balance. The idea of the one China policy is that on the whole, we support peace and stability in this region. We don't take a position as to how Taiwan's status is ultimately decided. That's something for Taiwan and for Beijing to work out by themselves. But we don't want that to be resolved by force or by coercion. And especially since Taiwan has become a democracy, we want it to be democratically acceptable to the people of Taiwan. Why? Because Taiwan's fate, for reasons of geography and a whole lot else, is just tied up to the fate of our treaty allies, Japan, South Korea, Australia, and beyond. And there's no way to prevent catastrophic cascading consequences in this region if Taiwan falls by force or coercion.
Whenever great powers shoot themselves in the foot, it's usually because they have a leader who's obsessed with an historic wrong in their mind, right? It is not usually about the current situation. Take Putin with Ukraine. He just believes, nope, Ukraine is not a country. It's part of Russia. And I get the same sense from Xi, right? That he views, right? You even say this, that you label that Taiwan's, he sees it as a linchpin to what you call national rejuvenation.
Yeah.
which means it's an ideological obsession, right, of the leaders. But what is it other? Why do they take aside pride, history,
Mm.
and maybe that is the strongest reasoning that they want it? What's the practical reason that they want this so bad?
This is a great question. This is how we should start. So, as you say, Taiwan is the unfinished business of the Chinese Civil War.
Mm-hmm.
And especially since Taiwan has democratized, since Taiwan has become this staggering success of one of the most open and prosperous and technologically advanced societies on earth, having it across the strait is a bit uncomfortable for the Chinese Communist Party, right? Because it's a living, breathing example of what another China could have looked like.
Mm-hmm.
A China that is both wealthier and more technologically advanced and accepted in the international community and free. So that's understandable. And Xi Jinping is deeply invested in this issue, but so were his predecessors.
Mm-hmm.
And to study the history of this issue is to see that going back all the way to Mao, Chinese leaders have lusted after this prize, and they have turned it into a domestic propaganda object.
Mm-hmm.
So the thing to understand, though, is that from the very beginning, it has always been entwined with relations with the United States.
Mm-hmm.
When the communists took over the mainland in the fall of 1949, Mao immediately gave his generals instructions to plan an invasion of Taiwan. And they looked into what an amphibious operation would look like, and they decided it can't be done because the island's geography is just extremely difficult. And they've been working on that problem for 70 years, and I think they're not satisfied yet, but they're getting closer. Why does it matter? The first reason is geography. So Taiwan is a link in the first island chain, an archipelago that goes from Japan, actually starting in the Russian Kuril Islands, all the way down into the South China Sea. And you sort of have to look at a topographic map because in between those islands, the sea is often so shallow that you can't navigate through. So there's only a few choke points in between these islands that you can actually navigate through. And that means China's Navy, which is now the world's largest in fleet size, is like a bird in a cage. They're trapped in these little inland seas, the Yellow Sea, the East China Sea, the South China Sea. And they want to burst out into the wider waters of the Western Pacific to project power globally. But they can't do it as long as the U.S. has allies and partners all astride that island chain. Mm-hmm. So that's the first reason. A second reason is the semiconductor fabrication facilities on Taiwan. Yeah. And then the third reason is the role that Taiwan plays in the regional economic order, and the way that Taiwan might fall would set a precedent for China's ability to use economic coercion against other countries in the region. And you put these all together and you see if they can get this, all of the dominoes fall and they can achieve national rejuvenation pretty quick.
Okay. I mean, I hear the case, but it still feels more ideological and caught up in history books. And it really is kind of mean. Taiwan's no threat to China. China's built this massive economy. Mm-hmm. China's probably going to catch up in the chip space. We see, what is a necessity is the mother of all invention, right? Mm-hmm. They have to innovate here. So this still feels like a vanity project more than an actual strategic necessity.
So I think the overall point that it's nice to have, not need to have, mm-hmm. is right. And I end the book with a vignette of the last time I was in Beijing mm-hmm. in 2023, where I went to the National Museum in Tiananmen Square. And I went to this exhibit in the museum called Road to Rejuvenation, mm-hmm. Which tracks the century of humiliation and then the party's rise and rule. And Xi Jinping is obsessed with this exhibit. One of the first things he did after taking power in 2012 was he took the whole Politburo Standing Committee there and he said, this exhibit records our history and our present, and we're going to write the next chapter together. And then he added in 2018 this glitzy new annex to celebrate his achievements in the so-called new era. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of interesting because the museum is packed with tourists from all over China. And this So the museum is, this exhibit is not. It's empty,
Hmm.
completely empty. I was there alone for 2 hours. And you can see the scope of his ambition. Military stuff is clearly part of it, but there's also a whole wall devoted to ethnic minorities where he's smiling serenely as the harmonized ethnic minorities sing and dance. And there's another about how China's going green with green mountains and electric vehicles. And there's another of him, cheering athletes at the Olympics. And you see that national rejuvenation is about putting China at the forefront of literally every human endeavor.
Hmm.
Literally every human endeavor. It's about getting rich, technologically advanced, green, harmonious, culturally advanced. And so Taiwan is the linchpin of that arch. But if he rolls the iron dice, he has a whole lot to lose. And that's the double-edged sword of his ambition. And that is ultimately why he is deterrable. But you have to show him that if he messes up over Taiwan, he could put the whole project in jeopardy.
Well, let's get to deterrence here. I am a real pessimist when it comes to Taiwan, because I think that and this is where I'm not going to pretend I'm an expert in how Chinese communist policy decision making comes. But if you're just doing game theory and you're China and you look at the current geopolitical situation, you're never going to probably have a more pliant American president than the one you have now. The United States is stretched right now, financially and militarily. Particularly, we're seeing it in the Middle East, where suddenly we're going to end up not being able to sell certain things to Ukraine because we need it for the war with Iran. And if there's ever a time to do it, it's probably while Trump's still president in this current situation, especially since now the appetite with the American public, whatever anti-China sentiment one can use to rally Americans around the flag is a lot harder already due to the unpopularity of this war with Iran.
Right.
And, I have always wondered in my head, boy, how do you sell the American public on defending this island halfway around the globe, right? That American blood and treasure should be used to defend this island. I think it's just very difficult, just in the current moment we're in, the lack of credibility American political institutions have with the average voter these days. So you're just going to have a lot of skepticism. You know how the Chinese think better than I do. You're the expert here. Am I off? Am I overthinking this? Is this not how the Chinese are thinking?
I think there's a lot of truth in what you say, but I don't fully agree. I fully agree that the remainder of Trump's term is a uniquely tempting moment because Trump is so transactional, because he doesn't think strategically.
Look, the Chinese think they may be able to get our defense of Taiwan as part of the trade negotiation.
Absolutely. So there's every
Trump hasn't ruled it out.
There's every reason for them to try to see what they can get out of Trump at the negotiating table, and then failing that, to squeeze him and see what he gives up. And I think when we talk about dates, we need to recognize it's not a question of whether China does it or doesn't. They are already doing it. They are squeezing Taiwan.
Right now, it's a coercion. Right now, it's soft power,
every direction. Right? It's the boa constrictor strategy, using every tool of their national power, squeezing Taiwanese airlines to list themselves as Chinese on their websites, pressuring third countries to extradite Taiwanese nationals to Taiwan, to China for trial, establishing a near permanent presence of drones and other stuff all around the airspace and waters around Taiwan.
Getting other countries that had diplomatic relations with Taiwan to drop it.
Yes.
And they've coerced a few to do that.
Exactly. So the question becomes, I think their plan A is just squeeze Taiwan to death, or squeeze Taiwan to the point where it, like Hong Kong, realizes the cavalry isn't coming. Nope. We just have to negotiate. And then they sign some piece of paper that says one country, two systems, Taiwan version. And then Xi Jinping declares victory.
Yeah.
And that's the Hong Kong model. And that's a lot more attractive than rolling the dice on an invasion, which, as Russia showed in Ukraine, could go wrong.
Right.
But
Hmm.
here's the thing. China has a political calendar too. 2027 is a party Congress year. And remember, the last party Congress year, granted it was COVID, but it was also COVID was over everywhere in the world. Xi Jinping locked everyone in their house for a
Yeah.
year.
He took advantage of it for another
That's
year.
how paranoid he was
Yeah.
going into the last party Congress to get his third term. So now he's going up for a fourth term. He's completely cleared out the top brass in the People's Liberation Army. I mean, do you really think there aren't more purges coming headed
Well,
into
what
the
do
party
we, how
Congress?
should we read these purges? I mean, I think, look, as usual, right? Um, we Americans, our American political leaders are just terrible at putting ourselves in somebody else's shoes, whether it was Bush looking into the soul of Putin or Biden and his friendship as when she was vice premier and frankly the wrong assumptions he made about the personal relationship he had developed with him. I think there's just been massive miscalculations on the American side of things when it comes to both Putin and Xi. She's a much she's got a much bigger appetite, I think, at least in his head, than I think a lot of us thought. And I don't think we view Chinese leaders in the same way we view Russian leaders, I guess, whatever it is, or we assumed there'd be pragmatism and transactionalism because for the most part, that's how the Chinese have behaved diplomatically around the world. They're very transactional. And so I think that has probably given us false hope, but internally, she's behaving like a paranoid dictator.
Well, I mean, he's not a man who's given a whole lot of interviews. So in his in his biography, you can read the tea leaves and come up with your own psychoanalytical profile.
Yeah, we seem like we
Um,
don't know much about him, but
we
yeah.
don't. We do know that when he was, I mean, Joseph Terigian, my former Hoover colleague, has a wonderful biography of his father uh,
Yes,
that
I've interviewed him for
that
this
paints a
because I find
picture.
for the same reason because I'm obsessed with trying to learn more about Xi, and it's interesting that it was easier to write a book about his father than it is about him.
And Joseph went to all of these former archives in the post-Soviet world. But
Yeah.
what you see is, a portrait of a young man who was raised as much of a princeling as a princeling can be.
Hmm.
And he has everything ripped away from him. He has everything ripped away. And he's sent down to the countryside to be re-educated by pig farmers.
Right.
And his education is disrupted. So he has to get essentially fake degrees later on. And his sister kills herself because of the harassment. This is a deeply traumatic moment. And his conclusion is he's going to join the party, become redder than red. Uh, but it's a deeply traumatic experience in his young life, which shows him that no matter how much security and status and fame you have, it can come apart very quickly. And I think what we know about him, Kevin Rudd, the former Australian prime minister who speaks beautiful Chinese and has spent time with him, Rudd recalls in his book, sitting with Xi Jinping by a bonfire and talking with him about the world and just being taken by how afraid he is of color revolutions and all these things that could tear China apart. So I think if you're Xi Jinping and you look at this Taiwan question, you're deeply skeptical about your forces when your generals
Hmm.
say, "No, we can do
Right.
this, sir." I think I think you look at this and you say there's a whole lot of ways that this could go wrong, that the Americans could use this issue against me, and
Hmm.
I think you are not in a hurry. I think he does want to be the guy who gets it done, but I think he's very happy to do this through a diplomatic solution
Hmm.
that involves signing a piece of paper that allows him to declare victory and then kicking the reintegration or whatever to his successor. This is the thing about national rejuvenation, right? It's a wonderful goal to set because the deadline is 2049 when he'll be 96 years old. So he can claim credit for it all. But if there's anything that's not quite, any loose ends that aren't quite wrapped up, he can pass into his successor with no loss of face. And I think that's important. He hasn't tied his hands here. If you go into
Mm,
his National Museum, it's not like he's saving a wall or a trophy case in the exhibit for
for
Taiwan.
unification.
There's just not a mention of Taiwan.
This episode of the Chuck Toddcast is brought to you by Soul. So if you love that end of the day unwind but hate the hangover, Soul's Out of Office is for you. These sparkling THC drinks and gummies give you the same relaxed social feeling without the alcohol, without the calories, and without the crash. Soul is a wellness brand that believes feeling good should be fun and easy. Soul specializes in delicious hemp-derived THC and CBD products designed to boost your mood and help you unwind. Their best-selling out-of-office gummies were designed to provide a mild, relaxing buzz, boost your mood, and enhance creativity and relaxation. With 5 different strengths, you can tailor the dose to fit your vibe. Soul also has a variety of products specifically designed to help you get a better night's rest, including their top-selling Sleepy Gummies, a fan favorite for deep, restorous sleep. Look, I have made no secret. I am a believer in this stuff, in cannabis and hemp derived. I do not partake in alcohol. I think this stuff is a lot safer than alcohol, a lot less addictive than alcohol. And yes, I have to say, I love these drinks. It is the feeling. It is the glass of wine, and you grab the beer after work. You pour yourself a glass of wine, after work. That's what this is. So no hangover, and no excess calories like this. I'm a big fan. So bring on the good vibes and treat yourself to Soul today. Right now, Soul is offering my audience 30% off your entire order. Go to getsoul.com and use the word Toddcast. That's getsoul.com, promo code Toddcast for 30% off. And yes, I too am a customer. Let's talk about the purge of the military leaders, because that's another thing. What does that tell us about our own intelligence capabilities inside the Chinese government? Frankly, the West in general, Western intelligence agencies. And look, I have my own concerns about the quality of intelligence right now, because for a variety of reasons. We have an American president who doesn't trust the IC. You probably have rank and file IC members that don't trust the leaders. You also have other countries not wanting to share with the US anymore because of this. I mean, there's sort of a cascade of reasons why we may have bigger problems with our own intelligence apparatus than we've had in quite some time. But it feels like we're not alone in not fully realizing how this purge was possible. I mean, one of his closest allies, like one of his longest relationships, I think both politically and personally, was part of this purge. Is it just all paranoia? Is it disappointment in the military? Is it a concern he didn't have enough control over the PLA?
So, unfortunately, I don't have the answer to you.
Well, we just talked about we have no intelligence.
We have no intelligence, and just this is open source, right? But based on the open source, we have no idea. And I think anyone who has confidence that it's one way or the other on Taiwan is just pitching an op-ed, because you can spin the story either way. So we don't know why he did it, but we can say something about the situation now that he has done it. Now that he has done it, he's in full control of the PLA. How do you know? Well, look at the org chart. There's more empty chairs than full chairs.
Right.
So he's now running the show. What he doesn't have yet is a new cast of handpicked characters who will carry out his wishes. Now, we don't know why he did it, but we do know that it's a little strange to start a war or start a crisis that runs a high risk of escalation to war if you don't have military officers at the top that you trust.
Right.
I think going into the next party Congress, he has some big decisions to make, not just about the PLA, but about succession. So far, he has raised allowed rumors to brew about a couple of bright young things. And I have
almost like
published
trial balloon. Their version of trial balloons, aren't they?
And then he has smacked him down with a hammer. So the lesson has become the last thing you want to be in the CCP is like rumored to be the next in
Yeah.
line. That's like
I think that's
guaranteed
like
that you're
today's
going down.
Republican Party in America, but yes.
Something like that. Something like that. I wonder where we got that from. But seriously, he's not getting any younger.
Hmm.
There's all these rumors about his health. Who knows what's true?
Right.
But he's either going to go in with a successor in mind or he's going to go in without a successor in mind. He's probably going to have more purges he wants to do. And if he wants to move against Taiwan, why initiate something that could become an open-ended
Hmm.
cluster? His equivalent of the Russia's invasion of Ukraine or
Right.
our Iran war, when he's got this, he has to deliver his work report and he wants everyone to clap and he wants everything to be controlled. Much more likely, he gets a statement, gets everyone to sign the statement that gives him permission to take a harder line on Taiwan. And then he comes out of it in 2028 with basically a new mandate. Then Taiwan has elections that spring, and he's like, okay, guess what? The DPP, the current ruling party, isn't allowed to win, or else.
Oh, interesting.
I
And
think
that
that's
could
a
be a
much
moment.
more
That's the
plausible
moment.
timetable.
Yeah.
Trump will be a lame duck. We will be in the
Yeah.
midst of our 2028 cycle.
Sure.
Who wants a war with Taiwan over
So you
2020?
see 2028 actually as the moment to move a weaker Trump, but Trump's still there, and an America that is going to be more focused on its domestic situation than wanting to get
Yeah,
involved with a
because
war in Asia.
because if their strategy is the boa constrictor strategy,
Hmm.
then they're just going to keep doing it, and at some point, Taiwan's going to choke unless we intervene. So
So
this is
yeah,
the problem with thinking about deterrence as like we're
yeah,
trying to stop him from doing X. No,
right,
he's already doing it. So his threat is you Americans. It's on you
yeah,
to draw the line.
right,
And when you draw the line, the Nasdaq collapses
right.
and everyone panics, and then you are accepting the consequences of holding us to account. But it's really on us.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, this is why Iran's probably playing out as about as well for Xi's interests as you could possibly put out. Let me go to the. It seems as if we know how to do deterrence for kinetic deterrence, right? We will sell arms to
Mhm.
Taiwan, and we will create new military alliances, or call them diplomatic alliances,
Mhm.
pretty that are quasi-military alliances. The Quad, I think, is on its way to becoming you could see how it could become, at least as far as Chinese deterrence, a military alliance. Japan, Australia, United States, India, maybe, right? Um, and that's possible. And some of this has to do with something that I did a couple years ago at Meet the Press, and what I know many a think tank has done is when you do the military wargaming of
Mhm.
what would happen if China invaded Taiwan, and we decided to defend Taiwan, help side with Taiwan and help do it, that China wins that standoff 7 times out of 10 when you go through these war game exercises. So we seem to know what needs to be done if we got into an actual kinetic back and forth with China, and we're trying to fix that. It seems as if we do not have an effective deterrence strategy to this boa constrictor strategy,
Mhm.
right? That this is it's I don't know what deterrence would work. You've got a Taiwanese population that is, the more they flex independence, the more that it seems that that's worse for them. They what does deterrence of the boa constrictor strategy look like?
Okay, I'm going to agree wholeheartedly with half of your question and
Hmm.
challenge the premise of the other.
Okay.
So, for the last 50 years, really for the last 70 years, um, we have maintained deterrence. Since Mao first gave his generals the instruction to, consider the invasion of Taiwan in 1950,
Hmm.
we have deterred aggression. We have kept the peace in the region through what we call the strategy of denial, which is just showing we're militarily stronger.
Hmm.
We don't even have to use nukes to do it. If China moves against Taiwan, we can defeat their ability to put men on the beaches and to take the island.
Well, that was obvious through 2000.
Yeah. So with the war games that you cite, I wouldn't put any stock at all in those. Basically, war games are not crystal balls. They're not simulations of what's going to happen. They're games to explore what one side or the other might do in specific situations and like expand your imagination. So
Yeah.
I recently took part in a war game where I was playing China and nukes were involved, and like
Yeah. Nukes
they
are
do
involved
the
in every
best they
one of them, it
can to
seems
make
like.
them realistic,
Yeah.
but there's a whole lot of assumptions. You say we want to do and shoot at the following ships, and you either sink them or you don't. But that's just a computer model in the best
Right.
case. Uh, as far as I understand, my last book was called The Arsenal of Democracy, was about the specific military and military industrial parts of this. My best understanding is that if we fought China today, a high intensity war in the Western Pacific, it would be nasty. Thousands
Mhm.
of Americans would die. But within a matter of days to a couple of weeks, pretty much all of the PLA Navy would be at the bottom of the Taiwan Strait. Most of their Air Force would be obliterated. We would essentially maritime wars, air and naval wars, the kind we haven't fought for 80 years, they work fundamentally differently from land wars. It's not about attrition and holding back reserves. It's just about who can deliver the hardest, most effective opening punch. And a lot of that has to do with cyber and electronic warfare and other classified stuff that allows you to fry the other guy's eyes and ears.
Right.
And we have various advantages in those capabilities, which are super classified. The balance is tilting. It's not as much of a sure bet as it was before, but I think it's safe to say if China thought they could defeat us in a high-end conventional war, our problems would go way beyond Taiwan. It would be about the defense of Japan and the Philippines
Right.
and South Korea and Australia and Guam and Hawaii, and China would be acting in a much less cautious and restrained way. However, as you say, China doesn't necessarily have to think they could win that war if they're confident that they can keep the contest in a crisis sort of short of war. And this is your question about how to deter the gray zone strategy. I think the basic idea should be we need to show we're going to push back proportionally to maintain an overall stable situation. And that's tricky because let's say they have thousands of fishing vessels, civilian fishing vessels, which are paramilitary trained by the PLA that are hanging out around Taiwan, harassing shipping. We're not going to do the same thing to China. So we need to stabilize the situation in another domain, and it's tricky to establish like what is proportional. But basically, according to these age-old traditions, we don't have like an explicit military to military relationship with Taiwan. Like certain levels of senior US officials aren't
Mhm.
supposed to go to Taiwan.
Right.
And as China has proceeded with this boa constrictor strategy, it has been disclosed, sent more trainers to
Mhm.
Taiwan to help them develop their forces. And that kind of thing, pushing back in another domain to help Taiwan defend itself,
Mhm.
improve the confidence of the people of Taiwan. That's kind of the best we can do. And there's a whole bunch of stuff we can do: energy partnerships, technology partnerships, giving visas to Taiwanese, more direct flights. There's a whole lot
Right.
of stuff that we can do that can stabilize an overall balance. But we have to threaten China. If you push harder in the gray zone, we will push harder too.
The let's talk about Taiwan's domestic politics
Yeah.
here, because there's not, look, just like Russia did with Ukraine starting 15 years ago, Russia was trying to win it at the ballot box,
Yeah.
right? They were basically um, trying to find compliant leaders
Mhm.
that would want to stay in the sphere of Russia's influence. And then when they frankly, took a couple of losses there for them to decide, all right, we can't do this way. We're going to now try it the other way. I think China still thinks they can win a PR campaign in Taiwan. Is that what you think?
Absolutely. And I think that's another reason not to invade. Right. So
Yeah.
if you look at the
No, if you
surveys,
invade, you harden
yeah,
the opposition. I mean,
yeah,
Ukraine's never going to be in Russia's sphere of influence in our lifetimes.
exactly.
Never. Right. We
Exactly.
know too many Ukrainians. You think they're angry now? Do you
And
think they
and
were angry at the start of this war?
and this raises a really important point about public opinion
Mhm.
that is missed in surveys. That gets back to the point you asked earlier about why would the American people go for this?
Right.
Why would an American president go for this? And the answer, I'm a historian, so I think about these things as sort of path dependencies. That's how I'm trained. But when you look at the histories of great power wars or even great power crises, like the Cuban Missile Crisis, these things do not fall out of the clear blue sky. They emerge over the course of years, then months, then weeks, through a path-dependent arc where someone does this, and then we do that, and then they do this, and then we do that, and we put reputational capital on the line saying, hey, publicly, don't do this or else. And then by the time it's time for choosing, we have skin in the game, and backing down means something totally different than it did at the beginning. And maybe we choose to back down, but we have chips on the table now. And that is why I can't think of an example in American history where a president has decided, for reasons of strategy, we need to go to war or we need to go to the brink of war, and the American public hasn't come along. This Iran war may actually be the first time.
This is the first time where an American president's initial military success was not greeted with a decisive approval from the American public. Right?
But this
at
was also
best,
unusual
even the
because
first 3 days. But
he never gave a
50,
speech. He never gave an Oval
right?
Office address to the American people saying, hey, listen, like, I know this is, people don't want this. Here's my reasoning. He still hasn't even articulated what we're fighting for, what the war aims are. I think a Taiwan situation would be different. A Taiwan situation, China would push, and it might be the case that either Taiwan's morale implodes or our morale implodes or both. And then China gets the prize without fighting. That's possible. But I think equally possible, in fact, probably base case, if China starts squeezing Taiwan, we do posturing to try to make them stop. And then they do a little more, and we do a little more, and we do a little more. And they maybe mobilize their forces on their side of the strait or start doing economic coercion. And we start surging ships to the region. And the market starts getting nervous, and then by the time we actually get to the precipice, it's a completely different situation.
Is there the other thing that I fear is about to happen for those that want Taiwan independence is that they flee the country, and given what's happening with the big chip maker there at
TSMC.
TSMC. Thank you. I was going to say TCMC. And the fact that they're basically stuck having to build their business in the United States now, right? Something that it's been fascinating to watch, where it's so clear the company wishes it weren't doing this. They're doing this because they feel like they have to, not because they want to. Could the unintended consequence be that those that want to fight just leave? And then those that stay just want to have peace and then become more compliant?
Possibly. But I think it would take a lot to get to the point where all those people leave. There's elites. When I go to Taipei, and I have, friends who are in business, and, they are going out to omakase every night. And like, some of them have Canadian citizenship for their kids, and they've got the ski chalet in Switzerland or whatever. And some of these people do exist in Taiwan, but for the most part, ordinary people, they don't have a place to go. They don't have a visa status that allows them to just pick up and go to Japan or Australia or someplace else. And it takes a lot to walk away and abandon your home. And what could happen, and what I warn about in the book, so you mentioned war games, right? The war games usually start with the war game I played a couple of weeks ago. It started with, in the pre-turn, us Team China had blown up a U.S. aircraft carrier. So that's like T equals 0. That's like the first turn, but that's not in the real world how a crisis happens. The crisis starts happening before those first shots, and usually what would happen historically is people would say, well, this is basically a non-issue. It's a non-issue. It's a non-issue, until everyone panics at the same time.
Right.
And then how do you get everyone out of the country? Like, we thought that the evacuations from Saigon and Kabul were hard. Try Taipei.
You're
right. Taiwan is a wealthy, sophisticated democracy with tens of millions of people. There's 800,000 foreigners there right now, including tens of thousands of Americans. We got thousands of Brits, of Japanese, of Germans, of Australians, and so on. How do you get all those people out? If I'm China, I want to put the squeeze on to see if the Americans yank their people. Because once the foreigners try to pull out their citizens, what does that message say to the people of Taiwan? You're on your own. You're on your own.
This episode of the Chuck Toddcast is brought to you by Wild Grain. Wild Grain is the first bake from frozen subscription box for sourdough breads, artisanal pastries, and fresh pastas. Plus, all the items conveniently bake in 25 minutes or less. Unlike many store-bought options, Wild Grain uses some simple ingredients you can pronounce and a slow fermentation process that can be a lot easier on your belly, little gut health there, right? And richer in nutrients and antioxidants. There's also no preservatives and no shortcuts. The Wild Grain boxes are fully customizable. In addition to their variety box, they have a gluten-free box, a vegan box, and a new protein box. I will tell you, I have done the gluten-free box. I have done it a second time. I have also used the code, the Toddcast code, which I'm going to be telling you about in a minute. If you use the promo code Toddcast at checkout, you get $30 off. I've already used it as a gift to somebody else who loves this bread. Look, it is hard to find good gluten-free bread. I had never had gluten-free sourdough. It is fantastic. Follow the step-by-step instructions. It's not hard. We did it right the first time. And trust me, I rarely do anything right the first time when it comes to these things. So there is nothing like having an artesian bakery in your freezer to chase away the winter chill. Now is the best time to stay in and enjoy some comforting homemade meals with Wild Grain. I obviously highly recommend it. It is worth giving Wild Grain a try. Right now, Wild Grain is offering my listeners $30 off your first box, plus free croissants for life. Come on. When you go to wildgrain.com/Toddcast to start your subscription today, that's $30 off your first box and free croissants for life when you visit wildgrain.com/Toddcast, or simply use the promo code Toddcast at checkout. This is a sponsor I absolutely embrace, so use that code. But doesn't this war not start with you sort of seem to outline this, not with a shot fired, but with essentially a blockade of the island, right? I mean, I think the war game I participated in, that was the beginning, right? And then it got the United States to send military, that's what triggered the U.S. military response of then sending a presence to try to break the blockade.
I think a blockade is not plan A. I think blockade is plan B for a couple of reasons. First of all, according to the Taiwan Relations Act, if the president wants to abandon Taiwan, the president's going to abandon Taiwan. But according to the Taiwan Relations Act, and probably 80% of Congress, a blockade of Taiwan is tantamount to an invasion. For the reason that China is trying now to get the TSMC chip-making facilities, and they're declaring war against the people of Taiwan, the civilians of Taiwan. A blockade means no food, no fuel, nothing in or out. And that, I think, it's such a humanitarian emergency that it's just such an appalling thing.
We're in the middle of doing this right now in our hemisphere.
It's true. It's true. But Taiwan, among other things, is the epicenter of the AI revolution. 99% of the NVIDIA GPUs that are training the next Claude and GPT are coming from Taiwan. You don't want China to just seize those, let alone seize those factories completely intact with all the engineers. So I think if they blockade, they create a panic, they get the whole world against them in the same way the whole world is against Iran right now.
Interesting.
What they could do,
think a blockade is so aggressive that those that might be neutral about this issue thinking, hey, this ain't our fight.
Yeah, much more likely.
Right.
They do.
It's like what happened with Ukraine, right? The invasion, Russia's invasion, united, brought Europe together in a way that I think Putin failed to imagine.
Yes. And I think much more likely they do what I call a quarantine, or some have called an indirect control scenario.
What is quarantine? What makes quarantine different from a blockade?
What's different is it's not saying nothing can come or go. It's just saying we control what comes and goes.
Gotcha.
So it's saying you want to fly from San Francisco to Taipei. Cool. Connect in the port of Shanghai or Fuzhou, in the airport in Fuzhou, and clear customs.
And we'll
And
decide whether you clear customs or not.
we'll decide whether or not.
Yeah.
Oh, you want to export these chips. Terribly sorry, you
Gotcha.
have to go through this port in
Right.
China. And that means
Hmm.
essentially Taiwan's on it. If we give into that principle, we're checkmated because we're not going to be able to send more diplomats, more military advisors. Taiwan will never be able to build the weapons it needs to defend itself. And China will seize control over the chip supply chain with those factories intact. And that's a much, and but then they can say, we're not waging war against the civilians. We're not
Hmm.
saying you can't
Sure.
send oil and food.
Right.
And then blockade, the really medieval stuff, that's a plan B, and everyone knows it's there. And if we don't play ball, it's always something that they
But
can do.
blockade is what you're saying is blockade it might as well be a declaration of war.
Correct.
Let's end this conversation with um, something that I think I'm constantly, we all know this: dictatorships, they end slowly then quickly,
Yeah.
right? When things go south with the people, they suddenly, it's incremental and then it's suddenly gone. There's a massive youth unemployment in China. There's all of the, I continue my optimism about US China relationships are simply that China's, you know, they've grown a middle class that is going to demand some services now. We see it in our more mature economy. And that can be the linchpin between domestic strife and domestic tranquility. Um, you know, this is China's economy's not been great as far as they've at least and everything is by comparison. Yes, they're still growing at a faster clip than we are. Well, we're two different economies. There's
I
still
don't think they are,
some.
by the way. The data are
Oh, interesting. You think the numbers they're fudging their numbers a little bit.
Mhm.
But the point is, it's pretty clear they've got an issue. They've
Mhm.
got a cranky middle class. They've got youth unemployment. They have their own population issues. Um, how stable are things domestically in your view? Again, it's like with Russia, that economy is horrendous. And yet, they're just for now sticking with them because there isn't an obvious alternative at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I think you said it best. In an authoritarian regime, things are stable until they're not, because no one wants to go against the guy with the guns.
Right.
Uh, China has some massive structural headwinds, and I think the way to think about their economy is the only way they have left to grow is through exports, which is another way to say this. The only way they have
Well,
yet to
that's
grow
deterrence. That's
is by
great.
stealing growth from other countries.
Sure, but in some ways, if they don't have stable relations around the world, they can't grow.
Yes. So that this is the economic piece of my
Hmm.
deterrence concept in the book. I
Hmm.
think, the first question with economic deterrence is, if we go to the brink, do we have a contingency plan for the crisis? We do
Hmm.
not just barrel into the crisis without thinking that markets are going to go crazy, prices will go up. How do we deal with this? So you need a
Hmm.
plan for that. But then you also need a plan. How do you use a Taiwan crisis as an opportunity to reset the world economy on terms that are more favorable to the rest of the world and less favorable to China? And India, Brazil, Indonesia, these countries may not take our position exactly on Taiwan, but none of them want to be hollowed out the way the American Rust Belt was by
Hmm.
just a tsunami of Chinese exports. And that's the world that China wants. A world where China makes everything,
Right.
and they're the factory and you're the farm. Like, they want to turn us into Argentina. That's the goal.
Mm.
And no one wants that. And so, how do you build a coalition of not just your allies, but the whole rest of the world, and say, if, God forbid, deterrence fails over Taiwan, whatever happens over the fate of Taiwan, we have an idea for how we're going to use this to reset the global trading system in a way where China
Hmm.
can't pull this stuff anymore. And then you're taking the juice out of their economic machine.
Mm.
100 million people in China are employed making stuff for export. You take those jobs away, that is what implodes their regime. But you can't do that overnight. It's a
Well,
10-year, 15-year project.
and it's now a 20-year project, right?
Yeah.
Because this president has set back economic relations with every single country on this on this earth with his tariff policies that have completely shaken up relationships. I mean, look at Look at this deal that China cuts with Canada. We worked for the last decade to keep Canada from doing these deals with China. And now, understandably so, what choice? And if you're in Canada's shoes, you look at it like, we can't trust the Americans at this moment for our economic prosperity. We're gonna have to play ball with everybody. I mean, how much has this tariff strategy of Trump's made it harder to rally what you just described here, which would be very rational economic deterrence of China? How much of a setback has this been?
It's been one step forward, but two steps back.
Yeah.
And the reason is China is so big of a challenge. China is a third of global manufacturing. You cannot just stop buying stuff from them overnight. Won't work. They're in every supply chain. And you can't tell other people to do that either. So we learned this on Liberation Day. We're like, we're going to go cold turkey on trade with China. Oops, that's not going to work. And countries that are even more dependent on trade with China are never going to do that. But what we have discovered is, no credit to the Trump administration on this, just credit to China's predatory trade policies. China is hollowing out the industrial base of the European Union. Like, Europeans are racing to populist parties because Volkswagen is dying, right? The economic heart of the European Union is dying. And it's if you go to India, if you go to South Korea, it's the same thing. They're being swamped by Chinese products. So the solution is, in principle, as many countries as possible should put up tariffs on China, and they should take them down on one another. Because what broke the global trading system is not that trade itself is bad, it's that we allowed a communist country that doesn't play by the rules into the system.
Yeah. Boy, it'd be nice if America created this coalition. Maybe we could call it the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and it was a alliance of Asian Pacific countries not named China and the United States. Oh wait, we tried that, and
TPP isn't coming back.
no, it's
but
not.
Some
but
version
we could really use it, right?
But some version of it is. And you already see the beginnings of this with the U.S. deal with Japan, just announced on the Takaichi visit. There's going to be collaboration on economic security, supply chains, critical minerals. We're working with the Europeans on this stuff. Why? Because China is so big of a challenge that actually this time we don't have a choice. But resetting the terms of this international trading system, if we're doing it in peacetime, it's going to be step by step. It's going to be political and messy. What we should be thinking about is, if, God forbid, deterrence fails with China, there's the question of what you do economically on day one to prevent the financial crisis.
Right.
And then there's the question of what you want the world to look like on day 100, day 1000, day 2000, after the immediate hostilities are over. This is like a break the glass scenario. So if this happens with China, our economic relationship with them won't be the same. Maybe we'll have probably we will not break it entirely, but it won't be the same. So what is our vision for what it should look like? And that is the contingency planning that we should be doing. Now, you're not going to have like a perfect plan, in a desk, and you take it out of the envelope, but you can agree on principles, the basic ideas of like how that system should be organized. Those are the conversations we should be having now, to imagine that the world after wouldn't necessarily just be economic mutually assured destruction. There's another way through.
You're actually outlining, and look, I kind of think that we ought to be thinking like that we're basically about to have another Cold War.
In the best case.
Right. And in some ways, isn't that what you're articulating? Like, let's put together a plan to effectively win a Cold War against China.
Kind of. But this situation is different from the Cold War in some fundamental ways. And the biggest one is that we're all economically interconnected.
No, right. The Soviets had no economic skin in the game, right? It made it easy to isolate them, and it made it easy for them to then, make common cause with those isolated with them.
Exactly. And what's different about the world now is that not only are we and the US and China deeply economically interconnected, but even if you imagine a world where we get divorced, or we just like pretend to get divorced, we're still going to be trading with each other via Mexico and Europe and India and everyone else. So there's no universe in which you bifurcate the world and it's just like China on the one side and us and everyone on the other. It's going to be a trifurcated world where, like, if deterrence collapses and we have to reset the economic relationship, we're going to be trading some with them. Maybe we'll still buy their Nikes, but we won't buy their iPhones or something.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's a whole lot of countries in between that trade with both sides. And we don't want those countries to sell our NVIDIA chips to China. And we
Mm-hmm.
don't want those countries to sell components that China can sabotage or remotely access or something into us. And so that means you need to reimagine how the whole economic system is wired, because you actually have to have control over the entire supply chain, know where goods are coming from, know where all the
Mm-hmm.
components come from. That's a completely different architecture. You need institutions that don't exist to do that. But that may be the world that we're moving towards.
Well, like this was pretty thought provoking, and you know, you dealt with so much nuance. It's hard to turn this into a 15-second social media bite. Come on now.
Well,
I,
it's podcasts like yours that help us dig into the details.
no, I mean it sounds like you don't think this is inevitable, and you're actually assume at this point that we're probably not going to have a hot kinetic military exchange with China this decade.
I hope
You
not.
seem more just
I
the
hope
way
not.
you're speaking, you seem pretty confident of that. I know you said hope, but is
If
that,
we
yeah,
do, I think we'll win. But I
they're
don't
not
think
ready,
I
is what you're saying.
I think there's a lot of uncertainty, but
Hmm.
I like our odds more than theirs. Uh,
And you think she is reality based enough to know this?
it's So basically, it's just really, really hard to get
Right.
tens of thousands of guys across the Taiwan Strait. I mean, this is one of the nastiest waterways in the world. You've got like 50-mile-an-hour winds, 50-foot waves. In the islands in the middle of the strait, the trees go
And just
sideways.
wait till we have, sharks with lasers on them
Oh
as
man.
well, right now. Just
And undersea drones and all the
right.
yeah, lots of lasers involved.
No,
But
of
like
course.
what you really don't want to do if you're Xi Jinping is put 15,000 troops on the beaches and then be unable to supply them and watch them get massacred.
Mm.
So a lot has to go right for him. There's many pathways that are just paths of least resistance.
This I should have asked this sooner, but it's a question I meant to ask. Is the there's always been this question, boy, the Chinese military hasn't been tested.
Mhm.
How would they test themselves? Is there another action they might take that has little that we don't care about that they may do that they may, in some ways the way the Russians, went into Georgia and things like that? Or uh, is there some way that they would want to test their military might on a soft target?
Sorry, I'm gonna my webcam is falling
No,
off.
no worries.
So
Let's be the last question and we'll get you out of here.
so you ask is there a way that they can test?
Yeah.
I think the thing to understand is that they have a direct pipeline of knowledge from the Russia-Ukraine war, and they have a direct pipeline of knowledge from our Iran
And
adventure.
that's their test. They're using this as
They
that's
are
what they're trying to learn from.
they are supplying the entire Russian military industrial ecosystem, but particularly Russia's drone base.
Mm,
And then, just as importantly, they're learning the counter drone tech,
right.
the electronic warfare mainly that you use to kill drones.
Right.
And then I am sure they've got a whole lot of spooks in Ukraine
Yep.
trying to buy up Ukrainian know how. So they're seeing both sides of that war in a way that we're not. That's the first thing. And then the second thing is in the Middle East. They're seeing how we do a high intensity bombing campaign.
Mm-hmm.
And if we go in with special forces and Marines, they're going to see that too. And they're going to learn from that. And I wouldn't be surprised if they will have some advisors on the ground in Iran,
Mm.
very, very quietly. But still, it's like studying in a textbook. It's not the same thing as actually
Never
fighting.
the same thing, right? Right.
And as we said it earlier in this conversation, uh, it's one thing to learn how to fight a land war over years and years and years. It's another thing when you're fighting a war in the air and at sea, where
Right.
basically everything's decided in the first 48 hours. Because if you
Right.
lose your key assets in the first 48 hours, there's no way you can come back and win.
Yeah.
And that it puts more of an impetus on us to win quick and
Yep.
go big, I don't think they want to fight a war with us. It's too
I
risky.
This was terrific. I really appreciate it. Good luck with the book. Again, the book is called Defending Taiwan. Make sure I get it right. And read it. Defending Taiwan, a strategy to prevent war with China. Like I said, very nuanced, very rational, and a very important conversation. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Chuck. Appreciate it.
You got it.